Welcome back, everybody. You're still opening up with S3 and your Feel Good Breakfast Show. We're about to get into a very important conversation, but a very deep one. We're talking about bullying this morning, and bullying affects many people, whether you're young, you're old. And last week, the country was shaken by the news of a grade 10 learner in Limpopo by the name of Lufuno Mavungu. I'm going to say her name again, Lufuno Mavungu, who after being violently beaten at school, then committed suicide. It's being called justice for Lufuno, and really it's justice that's needed for every person who is a victim of bullying. Now this morning we have family therapist and social worker Talya Ressel, who's joining us to share her opinion on this very difficult topic this morning. So Talya, a very good morning to you.
It's dark,
yeah,
but it's such a vital conversation to have, and I know there's been visuals circulating, and maybe that's something that people can take on board right now, is how you propagate the spread of those videos, first of all. Traumatic to see, far more traumatic to understand now what she went through, what her family are going through at this stage. Maybe we need to start with defining, because it comes in so many different guises, what bullying is. Obviously, we've seen the physical violence that came out in this instance, but it can be defined in many ways.
Absolutely, and unfortunately, it's on the rise. But it's important to distinguish between a single act or sort of a once-off, someone not being kind or not being nice, and bullying. Bullying is when it's repeatedly happening, and but more importantly, a power dynamic. So it can be in subtle ways. It doesn't always have to be in the physical aspect. Unfortunately, we've got a big rise in the social media aspects of the cyberbullying, because that is just escalating among teens and young people. But like you said at the beginning, I do want to point out, it's not just young people. We see bullying doesn't stop at high school.
Yeah.
It carries on in young adults and in this work environment as well. So it's such an important conversation that we're having, because we've got to remember, kids they're not born with empathy. We have to teach them how to be kind and how to interact with other people. Otherwise, we see these really unfortunate circumstances happening.
And I asked this with tears in my eyes, why does this happen? What does this say about the perpetrator? Because like you said, this is a power thing. It has to be, because why else would you do this to someone else?
And that's important, that we don't totally vilify the bullies, because they are also in need. Because usually
they're
people...
playing out a pattern, yeah.
Exactly. They are playing out something that is not okay with them. If they don't feel good, their self-esteem usually very low, or they feel powerless, or they've been themselves victims of bullying in other situations, and now they're trying to take it out on others. They've been exposed to violence. They haven't been taught ways in which to resolve conflict, or to actually just engage with people in a basic human kindness level.
And also, I call it the Lord of the Flies mentality, where people can get swept up in a group dynamic, especially in the context of a school, in a high school situation, which I think was very much a part of what happened in this instance. Most parents are immediately, alarm bells are going, how do I know? And I suppose it's even more alarming thinking that your child's probably going to withdraw if they are in that state. So how do we tell? What are the signs that we need to look out for that our child might be locked in that cycle?
And important, because often they don't share. Majority of children and young adults don't share when they are victims of bullying. So parents need to be paying attention to subtle signs of change in their behaviors. If they're not wanting to go to school or avoiding social situations, if their appetites have changed, their sleeping habits have changed. But most importantly, connect with your child. Use this opportunity to talk to your child about bullying. Say, I saw on Expresso today, they were talking about that. What do you think? Have you ever seen someone being bullied? What would you do if someone was bullying you? Connect with your child to open those avenues, and don't freak out, because often parents don't get discussed. The child doesn't discuss it with them because they think, oh my goodness, then my parents are going to take away my phone or phone the school.
Yeah, or it's going to be, it's going to make the situation even worse.
Exactly.
And maybe it's about setting a tempo where there is a constant conversation, and then you can broach any subject, but keeping that line of communication open.
I want to bring it back to Lufuno, of course. We saw this on social media, and this is the reality, that this happened, and people were actually taking a video of this.
It went viral.
Is this what is becoming of society, that someone is getting bullied and we're using this for entertainment? Or in a space where we're sharing this, but no one is helping the girl in the video.
So, and I do want to point out there were a couple girls who intervened in the video, so we do know that some did. But what does concern me is majority were clapping and cheering, if you could hear in the background. And that to me, why is this okay as a young adult to see that? And our first instinct isn't to stop it or to intervene. Why are we cheering that? And that again leads to, you might not be throwing the slap, but if you're being a bystander and not an upstander, then you're part of the problem.
And it's so easy. I think back to my own time in high school, especially, where I think it's probably most prevalent, how easy it was for people to get swept up in that. And you don't have the context. You don't know how damaging it can be. But in this case, we have seen how far it can go. Suicide was the end result here. And this is why we are taking today's discussion so seriously. Stay with us. We're going to continue in just a moment.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back as we continue a very, very important conversation this morning. Earlier, we spoke about some of the signs to look out for if you think that your child is being bullied or possibly bullying others. It's a two-way dynamic, and we're continuing that conversation right now with family therapist and social worker Talya Ressel. We're going to start with, we've identified maybe some of those alarm bells, those signs, and we want to do something, but this is a scary space for a parent. What do we do? How do we broach this, especially with a child that's already going through a lot?
Yes. So I think parents, the communication is so key. You really need to be talking to your child, like we said, connecting. I would encourage parents to get involved with the school if it's, if your child is school-going age, because I think as many people we can get involved to support the child, the better.
And the school needs to know.
The school needs to know. They need to help manage it when the child is on school property. Because often what is happening is it's happening not in the classrooms, it's happening in break or before school, after school, in those quiet moments where the teachers aren't able to observe. But definitely involve the school, get your child to connect to others, because it's usually isolated children or vulnerable children who already don't have a peer group to support them, to try and buffer that effect. So that's really important for parents to do.
Here's my question. What or should there be any consequences for the kids that are bullying others?
Absolutely. And not necessarily strict punishments where we're going to make the situation worse, but actually abilities for the child to rehabilitate and learn better skills in how to manage. So definitely the consequence needs to be that they need to make a repair. They need to apologize to the child to understand the consequence of their actions. I think there needs to be a consequence for should this happen again, and some sort of monitoring of that, whether it's by the parents, the adults involved. And then I think we need to send a bigger message to the kids at large that this behavior is not tolerated. This is not okay. School or these environments, they need to be safe places, and this is what we're putting in place in which to create safe places. So not just the consequence, but actually proactively putting structures in place.
Develop that EQ,
Yes,
because there's,
exactly.
we get to meet a lot of people and see a lot of South Africa, and I'm amazed at how often that things that we take for granted are just not there in a child's emotional development. I'm going to bring it back to this again because it's probably the most scary space for me as a parent. How do we monitor or control what happens on social media in a concrete way?
Yes.
What do we do?
So parents need to get savvy. If you're putting your child in front of a car or in a car to drive, you would give them driving lessons. So when your child is using social media devices, they need to learn how to use it appropriately, and part of that is how to interact appropriately. And at the same time, you as the parent need to know what is your child doing on social media. You don't have to know it brilliantly, but you've got to get savvy with what's going on in TikTok. You've got to monitor it.
Do you go as far as saying they have to give you access to all of their social media platforms? Because some would say that's an invasion of privacy, but on the back end, you can't protect them from what's happening.
Safety trumps privacy.
Okay.
And okay, as they get older, you would then pull back more and more if you're seeing that they're doing responsible behavior. But certainly in the beginning, you need to be monitoring it. You can ask for passwords, you can sit with them. You're not snooping. I want you to do it collaboratively,
Sure.
discuss it. And then yes, as you see that they can manage it, of course you're not going to read all their friends' messages, and they're allowed some privacy. But for me, safety trumps privacy every time.
I'm really so glad that we unpacked this, because we're seeing it again, like you said, not just in the younger space, but also in the older space, in the workspace, everywhere.
Yeah.
So maybe just some final thoughts as we, leave this topic of bullying in this space right now.
I think that we need to, the power lies not just within the victim and the perpetrator and supporting them, but it's those of us around there. If you see it happening, you need to try and reach out and support the person that's going through this. You need to be, as I used earlier, the upstander, not a bystander. So that's where we can also make big changes in supporting people with these difficult dynamics. And again, start early. Have these conversations from as little as 1 and 2 years old, where you see the child grabbing and we're learning that's not okay. This is how we manage conflict. All these things will go a long way into supporting this type of behavior.
Become good digital citizens.
Yes.
And that's something we can all do in terms of how we propagate social media content. I think
Yes.
something in the case of Lufuno that we all need to take responsibility for, because ultimately we're all consuming this,
Yes.
this so-called entertainment, and it's not that, it's real life. And I think most importantly, we have to take on board that bullying can and is probably one of the biggest contributors to teen suicide.
Yes.
So we need to do something about it, and it starts in the home.